So I'm Debbie Irving, and I'm a racial justice educator and writer. And the writing part, probably most people associate with this book, Waking Up White and Finding Myself in the Story of Race. And I also blog when I can fit it in. What made me write the book was I went to the age of 48 not understanding racism. I thought racism meant like not liking a person of color or being like a Ronald Sterling, Paula Deen name-calling bigot. And meanwhile, in my adult life, from let's say age 22 to 48, I was on diversity committees. It wasn't like I wasn't thinking about this stuff. But it took, at age 48, a graduate school course when I went back to get my master's in education. That course completely turned the issue around and asked me to look at my racial and cultural identity. No one had ever done that. Or if they had suggested it, I had dismissed it. If I had heard the words white privilege, I don't remember it. But by the time I got out of that course, my understanding of American history, of how racism worked, and how I actually played right into it, and my entire family history played right into it, I was so appalled that I had been let loose in the world, especially to teach children of color.
Well, I'm a little rattled because I went on, in addition to having trouble connecting via phone tonight, I did go onto your website and I read your take on my book, and I haven't had anyone else frame it the way you did, as dangerous, and there was some other language in there that threw me off. So I'm hoping we can have a really honest discussion and figure out where we're each coming from. Knowing what I know about you and your show, I thought we'd be starting right close to on a similar page in the context of white supremacy.
That hopefully we can do just that. We're all about having. I spoke with Miss Colley when I was not able to get you on the phone line. She raised some of the concerns, and I told her, number one, when you open your book, the people that have written reviews for your book, every single one of them has been a guest on our program. Tim Wise, right, multiple times, Eddie Moore Jr., multiple times, Terry Kelleher, admitted racist, and who also is a gay white man who adopted a black child, and Thomas Shapiro, The Hidden Cost of Being African American, as well as several other books that were constructed, but they've all been guests on our program, as well as Jane Elliot, Dr. Nell Irvin Painter. I'm really getting that out more for listeners, because I know particularly sometimes when black people, when they give some pushback to white people on racism, white supremacy, the black person is not given as much credibility, and that's just the way that we're trained to think that white people are more informed, they're the experts. These folks have been here. We have talked to a lot of these folks. I've read these folks' material, and I've been to the White Privilege Conference. So hopefully we can have an informed dialogue. We have had a lot of contact with some of the same folks, same books, same conferences, and what have you on racism, so that hopefully people can keep that in mind as we exchange views. And it does seem that we do have a different opinion on some things. Just so that we're on the same page, since you raised your concerns about the description, I'll read what I wrote, and then you can let us know what you had concerns about, or if you think anything that I wrote is inaccurate or not true. I want to give you uninterrupted time so you can respond. But this is the description that I wrote for the program. Debbie Irving visits the context of white supremacy. Irving is a white woman, suspected race soldier, an author, and an alleged racial justice educator and writer who teaches at Wheellock College. We'll examine her 2014 text, Waking Up White and Finding Myself in the Story of Race. Irving's intended audience is white folks. Presumably, they are to study this book and gradually cease the practice of terrorizing black people. Irving declares that there are many whites who no longer want a system of white supremacy. We're anxious for evidence of these pale promoters of justice. Irving also submits Quentin Tarantino's 2012 offering, Django Unchained, as an accurate representation of the authentic experiences of black people. A core aspect of her thesis is that whites are unaware, ignorant, unconscious lemmings benefiting from and blindly adhering to structural racism. This is a nauseating and dangerous publication, again perpetuating the insidious lie that whites are ignorant about racism. That's the description. You can read it on Facebook or TalkShoe or wherever. If you're listening to the archives, that's the way it'll be written on iTunes as well. Is anything inaccurate or not true in that statement, and or is any other concerns that you had about what's in the description?
Well, I when you describe the thesis, I would say that is true. You know, I am making, and I'm not talking about white. I'm really trying to describe my experience, and I would say that I am coming from a lifetime of ignorance and being a lemming, and all the other language you had in there. The word that struck me, which is something I haven't seen in any of the reviews or heard from any people, and I'm hoping to learn more from you about, is the word dangerous. What is it that you find dangerous about my thesis or my book?
Okay, I will answer your question. I just want to make sure there's nothing inaccurate or dishonest in the description.
Well, I think there's some out of context. For instance, the part about Django, there's one line in the opening of my press release that says, after a year of films, such as Django and 12 Years a Slave and The Butler, that shed light on the black experience, Irving sheds light on the white experience. And that's all I've ever said about Django. I didn't write a blog about it. Django's not in my book. I don't think Quentin Tarantino. That's obviously it's a caricature of a film. It's exaggerated. So that felt out of context to me. But I think maybe our big difference is, it sounds to me like for you, it can't be possible that white people are ignorant. That they do know that racism exists, and there's a willful denial or ignorance in order to not have to acknowledge power and privilege. Is that getting close to how your take on the white role in racism?
No. I will give that sentence that you wrote. It's the very first sentence. If you go to her blog or her website, DebbyIrving.com, if you read her press release, the very first sentence from February of this year is, recent films such as Django Unchained, The Butler, and 12 Years a Slave have made real the lived experience of black Americans. That's what you said. And my sentence is, Irving also submits Quentin Tarantino's 2012 offering, Django Unchained, as an accurate representation of the authentic experiences of black people. So, in my view, that is not out of context. That is what you said. And it's the top sentence on your press release on your website.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see how you made that jump. But to me, it is a jump. That isn't when I use the word real, I wouldn't have said all the words that you said with it.
Okay.
But I'm much more interested in hearing, I think for me the thing that really stood out, and if you are coming from this place, you wouldn't be the first person of color I've heard say it, and what I have heard people say is, I think white people know exactly what's going on. They just don't want to admit it. They don't want to have to give up power and privilege. And I have heard that, and that was where I figured you were coming from when I read it.
Okay. I don't know if you got to hear the introduction, but we normally do not have an introduction that long. It was about 10 minutes, the piece from Michelle Martin's Tell Me More, where she was talking with Catherine Russell Brown, black professor, author, about these racial hoaxes. You grew up close to the Boston area. Charles Stewart, white man.
At 8:45 p.m., emergency dispatchers received a harrowing call from a man who claimed he and his wife had just been shot. That man was Charles Stewart.
My wife's been shot. I've been shot. Where are you right now, sir? Can you indicate to me? No, I don't know. He made us go to an abandoned area.
Stewart went on to tell 911 that a black man, posing as an undercover cop, had hijacked his vehicle and demanded money. According to the story, the man then shot both Chuck and his pregnant wife at point-blank range.
The first bullet went right into Carol DeMady Stewart's head. The second one entered through the rear and basically came out his groin. Practically, literally blew his guts out.
Rescuers arrived on the scene and rushed Chuck to Boston City Hospital. Paramedics took Carol and her unborn baby to Brigham and Women's Hospital. Doctors were able to save Chuck, But Carol Stewart wasn't nearly so lucky.
Who killed his pregnant wife and blamed it on a black person, and the Boston Police Department savagely went after black people, they have video of them kicking in black people's houses.
A story that would spark the most invasive manhunt in the city's history. A manhunt that would lead to several volatile confrontations on the streets of Mission Hill and arouse newer, even harder feelings between black and white.
Harassing all my friends and my family and stuff, that was ridiculous.
I do feel that they're overreacting as far as going to people's house, knocking on their door, taking them out. I mean, that's really uncalled for.
They frisk you, and you be trying to talk to them. What happened? What happened? Oh, shut up. We searching you. Someone got shot and we just searching people.
Whether the Boston PD's militant search methods were legal or not, one thing was for certain: they weren't working. It had been a month since Carol's murder, and still, no suspect had been apprehended. And by now, the white community was in a state of panic.
I was getting the sense that people who were not of color, people who were not black, were now, looking at people of color in a very negative way.
And going after tons of black people, and then it comes out later that he lied and made this up and ultimately committed suicide. I think she mentioned Susan Smith, Bonnie Sweden, which is a more recent one. I listed at the beginning of the broadcast. There are even more recent examples of this from this year. If white people are ignorant about racism, how would it be possible for there to be this many illustrations of white people having these quote-unquote racial hoaxes?
The death of a pregnant white woman at the hands of a black perpetrator was like a spark in a powder keg.
The fact of the matter is, when this heinous crime was committed, people could not fathom that anybody would do that.
You have a woman coming from Lamaze classes at the Peter Ben Brigham with her husband, probably weeks before the baby's supposed to be born, maybe days before the baby's supposed to be born, getting shot in the head by a stray black criminal as they're going home to go to bed, her to go back to work and him to go back to work at, on Newbury Street the next day. So it played into everybody's worst fears. And it could have been anyone's daughter, it could have been anyone's son, it could have been anyone's best friends.
The city's newfound fears were only made worse by the voracious Boston news media.
Every news division, every news department in the city was all over that story with 3-4 reporters a day. Of course, the newspapers have bigger and better resources than most of the television stations, but it wasn't just a matter of wanting to scoop the other guy. It was a big story, and everybody wanted a piece of it. A lot of journalists in this town were identifying with Charles and Carol Delaney Stewart and thinking that could have been me.
A pregnant white woman just seemed so vulnerable. And I think that's why people immediately jumped. I mean, a pregnant white woman was killed. And it was easy to believe. The media jumped on it, and they automatically said it was a black man.
The seemingly racial nature of the crime was a hot topic of conversation in every white-collar hangout and upscale bar, from Newton to Newbury Street.
This was the young, up-and-coming, middle-class white couple from the suburbs. She was a lawyer. They both came from big families. Everyone loved her from everything that you knew about her. They both had roots in the community. I hate to say it was because they were white, but it was because it was everybody's all-American couple.
Where they blame something on a black person, where they lie and blame something on a black person, and it is frequently successful, at least for a little while, where people go along with this until, wait a minute, there's enough evidence that this person is really making this up. How would that be possible if white people are ignorant about racism?
Yeah, well, I would absolutely agree with you that all the white people you just mentioned, they knew exactly what they were doing. And that was part of their canny plan, was to point the finger at somebody who they understood would be easily, faces put up on television. The general public would agree, would have no problem. There wouldn't be any protests. But just as not all black people are the same, not all white people are the same. And I don't put myself in that category. I would never do anything so horrendous. And I was about to say, and B, I wouldn't jump to conclusions, but I think that would not be right. Once upon a time, I really did, if you showed me data about, for instance, arrest rates or incarceration rates, I would have interpreted that data, and I saw that, black men were incarcerated and arrested at a much higher rate than white men, for instance. I would have interpreted that data as it had something to do with the fault of the black man. That there actually was more violence, there was more theft, they were more deserving of going to jail, so I'll blame the victim. I had no framework of how white supremacy worked or what my role might be in it, including my role to have ingested all this bias as a white person. And so I think there's a big difference between, somebody who would create a setup like Charles Stewart did, and somebody who's going along and just watching the news and ingesting all this bias, but not necessarily acting on it in a violent way. So I put myself in that latter group. Does that make sense to you?
No. But I understand. I understand the logic of it. I hear that pretty regularly. In my opinion, the question that I've asked regularly on the program when I talk to white people: do racist white supremacists, do they assume that if you're white, you're racist? Every single white person I have ever asked on the air or private conversations wherever has said yes, and generally immediately. This is one of the few times where it does not take them a lot of time, a lot of hemming and hawing. We don't have any pussyfooting. They pretty immediately give an affirmative. Yes, racists, white supremacists, they assume if you're white, you're racist. That being the case, with that. See, that's what I mean. And for me to have a unanimous agreement on that reveals a lot about what it means to be a white person. And that, for me, is compounded with situations like Bonnie Sweden and Charles Stewart and Susan Smith and the white girl at LSU who said that a van of black people kidnapped and abducted her, and they found out it wasn't true. For these sort of things, and I'm sure there are tons more of these that we don't even know about, where they were successful and a black person just got fired or thrown in jail or whatever the case may be, and it never even came out that, this was all based on a lie and white people's dedication to racism. But that, for me, really gets to the core of why I think your work, and it's not just you. This is very common where white people submit that the reason we have a system of white supremacy in place is because white people are ignorant. And in my view, nothing could be further from the truth. You cannot be white and be ignorant about racism. If you are white, there are expectations that go along with that about what you are supposed to do, what you are not supposed to do as a white person in a system of white supremacy. And if you violate those do's and don'ts, other white people will let you know immediately, generally speaking, and there can be consequences if you do not adjust your behavior. Either that's true or is not. Are you saying that's not true?
No, I think I'm getting much closer to understanding what you're saying, and no, I do. There's absolutely a social code. I think if any of us step out of our social code, we get smacked around by the people who are invested in us staying in our role. You look at the black high school kid.
Hang on. Let's stay focused on white people. That's one of the things. If you're accepting the feedback, I don't want to do a lot of interrupting, but that's something we were talking about. White people having to stick to the racist code. I don't want to hear about black people having to adjust to social norms. I want you to respond specifically to white people having to abide by a racist code, or other white people will let them know they are committing an error.
I think that's absolutely true, and I don't think that white people often know that it's part of a system or a structure. In my experience, and with most of the people I work with, I partner with Eddie Moore. We have a workshop called I Am George Zimmerman, Exploring White Supremacy and Systems of Oppression. The people we work with there are dumbfounded when they understand that the social code that they have felt themselves boxed in by, which is what you're describing, is connected to a larger structure. This is a structure that was put in place in the late 1600s when the word white got inserted into our law. And for people who are living 400 years later, for me, I had no idea. I honestly didn't know I had a racial identity. I really thought that race was something that belonged to black and brown people. I had a 180-degree distorted view of what racism was. So if I felt social pressure to step back into my little white box, I would have seen it as a class box or a manners box, but I never would have thought that it was that I was holding in place this, exquisitely, that you couldn't design a better system of oppression, I don't think, than one that marks people physically in a way you can't change. I had no idea that system existed. I really didn't.
That is, it is just not believable. And as I said, that is dangerous, and it's not just you. It's many white people. The example that I reference pretty regularly, everyone, or I won't say everyone, but James Lowen's book, Sundown Towns, is very popular. People cite it on a regular basis to talk about how this system was in place. So I can't even say some years ago, the white woman that's coming on the program tomorrow, she said she interviewed a black male in Alabama in the 2000s where these signs are still up in some towns in Alabama. So ongoing. But people referencing that book, there's no way in the world any white person could look me in the face and tell me that this is the result of ignorance when you've got signs up saying, "Nigger, do not let the sun go down on you in this particular town." Who put the sign up? Are you saying that white people are illiterate? They can't read the sign? When you got signs on the water fountains not that long ago, in many of our lifetimes, people that are listening, well, not me, but many of the people that listen to this program, even in their lifetime, are you saying white people can't read the sign? They don't know what that sign means? When white people are talking about we're not going to sell any property to black people, they don't know what they're doing? That is foolishness of the highest order. And that's not just here. That is worldwide where you had that in place. It is a very recent thing for racism to be much more covert, where you don't have just blatant signs plastered everywhere and nigger jokes being a regular occurrence. That is a very recent thing. I say all the time, it would be absurd for you to try to assert this argument, and many of the other white people, because it's not just you, I hear this all the time, it would be absurd to try to assert this argument that this is the result of white ignorance just 50 years ago. I don't even think a white person could make that sort of statement with a straight face in 1960. And I'm submitting that not that much has changed. It has just gotten more covert. And in fact, I think this is the way that currently white people try to present the problem of racism, white supremacy, that they're just ignorant. I didn't know. I didn't know I was not supposed to say that. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to do that. I was just ignorant. I don't know. I think that's very common. It's excuse. I would almost say that is the current racist code, 2014, that we just don't know about racism, white supremacy. And really, I can fast forward because all that really becomes very irrelevant. If they're ignorant, they're not ignorant, whatever the case may be. Do you have any evidence that white people, once they get this information, once they know that the system, racism, white supremacy exists, that they're going to stop practicing racism?
What I'm really struck by is it feels to me that you I grew up.
Hang on, because you're not really answering my question, and I do just want to submit, because your response was that I'm talking about all white people. A core part of where we started was I said that your book submits, not just you're submitting that you think there are a lot of white people, and you just said you think white people can insulate themselves, that white people, a lot of them are ignorant about racism. I'm saying that's not true, and that's what my response reflected. Now, my question specifically, and to make sure I get my anecdote in, there's a video of white people out in the streets stabbing black people with the American flag.
So that day you were simply on your way to a meeting, right? You were a young attorney.
In 1976 in Boston, there'd been a period of racial violence directed primarily at young African-American kids, and there was a lot of tension throughout the city. Well, I was walking along this passageway. I could not see around the corner at the end of the passageway until I came close to it, and so I was unaware that there was a large group of students headed towards me. And as I approached the corner and they approached the corner, they had been riled up by a city councilor who was very opposed to busing in the city. I was one of the first people of color they encountered. One of the kids decided that they would swing back and take a shot at killing me with the American flag.
They're ignorant about racism. You got video of white people, white women saying, forget it, my white children are not going to school with black people. Let the niggers have the public schools in Boston. They got video of white people saying this. They're ignorant.
Just because I'm white doesn't mean that the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to me either. I am white and I want my rights.
We started up the hill. You can hear people saying, niggas go home. There were signs. They had made up signs saying, black people stay out. We don't want any niggers in our school. And there were people on the corners holding bananas like we were apes.
Inside, things were quiet, with most white students absent. At the end of the school day, more trouble waited outside. On the evening news, Bostonians saw school buses being attacked as they left South Boston.
And they were throwing eggs at the window and trying to hit people with them, and they was calling us black niggas.
I want to say that my little boy got back safe, but the only reason, I don't think why they should bust these smaller kids across there and get all hurt up when they can't defend themselves. I feel like they should go over here to this school over here in Denver. Instead of busting them way across there, they can't defend themselves, they can't fight, they can't do nothing.
Racial violence in the city known as the Cradle of Liberty made headlines across the country and around the world.
They're not going until they get some black cops and some black drivers. They did not pick my kid up at school. Left her over there.
Left her in South Boston?
Left her in South Boston. No, they left over there. All those people out there are Irish. They left her out there. And they refused to go get her.
At first we were just like regular children. We talked, we giggled, and talked about what we thought school was going to be like. Then we were escorted by police officers. And I just didn't really know why we, the black students, would need police escorts to go to school.
South Boston has always been a white neighborhood. I think everyone was taking it out on the blacks and blaming them, which at the time, well, now I realize it wasn't right, but being young, and we held it against the blacks personally. I and many other people from the neighborhood was throwing rocks at the buses.
And they were chanting, go home, we don't want you here.
And I yelled out, niggas eat shit, which I would never say in a million years, but that's what happened.
Most of us were crying. We were petrified. I felt if they got a hold of any one of the students that we would die.
Worrying out how they were going to get them out of there, how they were going to get the students out. And so they sent decoys. They sacrificed about 10 buses, knowing they were going to get destroyed.
Black students ran to other buses at the rear, out of harm's way.
A South Boston mob pulled a passing black motorist from his car. A policeman fired shots over the heads of the crowd and pulled the man to safety.
We don't teach our kids to hate anybody. All we want for our kids is to love and to get a decent education and to live decently as human beings. But we're not even distinguished as human beings as far as East Boston goes or South Boston. We're niggers. And I would be damned if I had any child of mine exposed to anything like that. I wouldn't want my child to sit beside it because, see, I'm not going to teach it to hate. And that's what's happening. That's the lesson that those kids have been getting out there in South Boston. Stand beside mommy, sweetie, and throw a rock at the nigger.
What do you think is going to happen when you go to school?
When we go up there, we're going to be stoned. It's not fair to me because why is the other way around when they come up here? When they come up here, we won't mess with them, so why when we come up there, they mess with us?
What do you think about the people of South Boston, Joanne? If you had a message you'd like to tell them, what would it be?
I don't think it's fair. It's not fair to me.
Let the niggers have the public schools in Boston. They got video of white people saying this. They're ignorant about racism. That makes absolutely no sense. But my question was, whether they're ignorant or not, are white people going to stop practicing racism once they get this information? That is the question.
Some will, some won't.
Do you have evidence that there are some white people that are going to stop practicing racism once they get this information?
Absolutely. This is what the White Privilege Conference is all about. It's all about educating people about how the system and structure.
Okay, we kind of moved away from the question. I'm really trying to stay focused on the question that was asked. So the question was, have you seen evidence that once white people get this information, they're going to stop practicing racism? And you said that some will, and the evidence that you cited is the White Privilege Conference. You named specifically Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. This is one of those, when I say for listeners, that's why I started at the beginning saying Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., he's been a guest on this program repeatedly. Dr. Peggy McIntosh, he's been a guest on this program. Tim Wise, admitted racist, he's been a guest on this program. I've been to the White Privilege Conference. We broadcasted there live for a week. This is one of those where if I was more confused, if I didn't know these people, you could get away with saying that. I know these people. I've talked to these people. I've read their work. They've been on this program. None of what you just said is, for me, evidence of white people no longer practicing racism. You have in your book, hang on one second. Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., you have in your book where Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. made an impassioned speech at the beginning of the conference that you attended, asking white people to not practice racism at the conference. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it. And I had the same experience. He said the same thing. He said white people at this conference were practicing racism against him, and he's supposed to be the founder. Where he said, I am the director, I am the founder of this conference, and they're not listening to me. I'm letting people know what should be happening, the way we're running the workshops, how we're supposed to facilitate all of this, and the white people are not listening to me. They're just going and doing their own thing. He said this to me. We talked about it on the program. I saw with my own eyes. We had people on the you can go back in the archives, 2010, that's the conference I was at. You can go back in the archives and hear black participants who paid money to be there, saying that they had white people in their workshop, minimizing what they had to say, telling them that they were wrong, that they didn't know what they were talking about.
I said, I'm interrupting you because you're wrong, and you got to deal with your wrong before I'll continue to talk to you. Because he really was, being totally, he does that all the time. He's very corporate, and he goes with the corporate thing. He's not being authentic. I said, you gotta live this. If you're gonna be the head of the round table for diversity, and you're not living it, I said, you violate the principles.
What was he doing? Specifically, what was he doing?
He said that he didn't speak out on it because she didn't call on him. I said, you don't use her as a reason. It's not her fault. You are in the room with this man right now. If you wanted to answer his question, you can go right up there and answer his question. Don't use her as and your excuse for that she didn't call on you and therefore that's why you didn't answer. Please. That made me so mad. He's going to use you. I was furious. I'm still livid about that. I mean, she didn't call on me.
Ignoring points that they were bringing up in the workshop. I asked the same question that I just asked you. Are white people going to stop practicing racism? Because really, that should be one of the first questions that's asked. If that answer is no, white people are not going to stop practicing racism, then that should be reflected in how we go about dealing with this problem. Just me asking the question, the person didn't even want to acknowledge my question. I had a room full of white people yelling at me, talking over me, interrupting me, telling me what I had to say was not important. And this is on video. This is documented. Even a white man came up to me after this happened and apologized with an attitude in front of the director. And I looked at her and I said, now you saw just what happened. Am I supposed to take that as this man is sincere he is really interested in ending racism, and all she could do is laugh. So absolutely not. And I think there's a lot of that. I talked to a lot of black people who had the same experience. So I do not think that is an example of the white privilege conference. If anything, I think that's a great environment for white people to refine their practice of racism, where they can cite Tim Wise and Jane Elliott and whomever else is at that conference to give the impression that they are not racist, to give the impression that they're working against it. That is not the case at all. I can go in more detail about Dr. Peggy McIntosh as well, but that's one of those, I would say, it really pays, the more informed you are about these events and these people, the more you can pick that apart. I think a lot of white people would submit that, and even some non-white people, as, white people are not racist. That is just false. Did you have a question?
I'm kind of dumbfounded. You kind of got me speechless, Gus. That doesn't happen very much.
The non-white people have frequently been tricked into thinking, even individuals like you, who say that they are not racist and that they are against racism.
Hey, I'm not saying
hang on. I'm not finished.
Hold on, you just put words in my mouth.
Hang on.
I'm a racist. I'm a white supremacist.
Hang on. Let me finish my commentary, because I didn't call you a racist. So let me finish my commentary.
I called myself a racist.
Cool in the gang. Fine. I will say your publicist said, when I spoke with her, she said Debbie Irving is not a racist. That's exactly what she said prior to starting.
Wow, so, I'll have to straighten her out. No,
I'm
a self-proclaimed racist and white supremacist. No, I am indeed.
I appreciate that. That is not in your book, by the way. At any rate.
Are you kidding? It's right in the first line.
Where you say you are a racist? What page is that on?
I say, it says, not so long ago, if you had called me a racist, I would have kicked and screamed. I would have run away and licked my wounds. I would have been so offended. I'm doing that from memory, but I have a book
I'm looking
here.
at it right now. I can read it. Not so long ago, if someone had called me a racist, I would have kicked and screamed in protest, but I'm a good person. I would have insisted I don't see color. I don't have a racist bone in my body. I would have felt insulted and misunderstood and stomped off to lick my wounds. That's because I thought being a racist meant not liking people of color or being a name-calling bigot. There is no point where you say, I am a racist. That is a real indirect way, in my opinion. That is not clear. That is nowhere close to what you just said. I am a racist white supremacist. That is not in your book anywhere, which, in my opinion, just further supports what I'm saying about this book is just not honest. You could have just put that sentence in there. I am a racist, period.
You're right.
At any rate, as I was saying. And you didn't. And you didn't. At any rate, in your book, as an admitted racist, I'm glad we got that out. As an admitted racist white supremacist, you admitted that one of your favorite comedians, you mentioned his name twice, was Chris Rock. What exactly do you find appealing about Chris Rock?
I was remembering a skit that he did on Saturday Night Live where where they were all on the bus, and it was he was dressed up to look white. I think he was trying to blend in a bus and see what it was like to be white. And as the bus moved down through neighborhoods, eventually all the black people got off till it was all white people. And as soon as the last black person was off, all of a sudden someone on this bus started handing out hors d'oeuvres and popped open a bottle of champagne. And it was a parody on what would happen in white space once it was completely white space. And I remember watching it and not thinking it was that funny. I didn't really get it years and years ago. And when I started waking up and understanding how racism worked and how it worked right under my nose and how it engaged me in it, that just blew me away, that I had been able to watch that video or that Saturday Night Live episode and not really get it. That was an example of me. That was an example for me of how different the world looked once I started to wake up.
That is fascinating. You talk about this in your book. You can go ahead and prepare to be jarred or whatever, to have hot coals under your feet. That sketch is not Chris Rock. It's Eddie Murphy. You have confused your black people. We talked about that sketch on the program repeatedly. It's very old. That came out in the 80s. Chris Rock was on Saturday Night Live, but he did not do that sketch.
No way! That's Eddie Murphy?
Yeah, ho-hum. At any rate.
Oh my God! It's interesting because that whole thing came up because I was talking to a black friend about it, and we were joking about it, and we both remembered it was Chris Rock. That was Eddie Murphy. Hey, you've given me two edits for my second edition. Gus, why did you want me on the show?
Because I think it's important to evaluate. I enjoy talking to white people. I have concluded that the problem of racism, white supremacy is white people. And I think it's very important that non-white people get better at asking white people questions. And particularly white people who say, like you're trying so hard. You're working to be an ally. You should definitely be asked questions and study to see if that's true. Does that make sense for non-white people? Ridiculous of the highest order and dangerous. I cannot emphasize that enough. Super dangerous, in my opinion, for non-white people to read this sort of book or just to have this way of thinking about racism, white supremacy, that this is white ignorance. And I think even Dr. Tommy Curry, when we talked about this, this insidious mythology, where he said it ends up setting up a paradigm where a lot of non-white people feel that it is our duty to go out and educate white people on racism. And I think that's even what you touched on about her. Frequently, she would not answer my question. She would just turn around and ask me the same question back. And that's something you kind of have to be on watch. Some of the questions I did answer just to get that information out to non-white people. And some of them I just ignored it and redirected back to my question. But that is common white supremacist tactic. Just the worst of the worst. And I cannot minimize or I cannot overstate the significance of her referencing the White Privilege Conference and Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. I'm so glad that I went to the conference. I'm so glad that we've had him on the program. The video that I just made, I got his audio clip in talking about that soothing lotion. In my view, white people understand you have been totally neutralized as a non-white person when you are in bed with a white person. And his white wife admitted to being a racist when we talked with her, when I met her personally. She was at the White Privilege Conference as well. But they understand that, and they will use that to their event. Well, Dr. Moore thinks I'm fantastic. You know, what are you talking about? He's a black male, and he's doing all this great work at the conference. They already know this conference has been neutralized, and this is not going anywhere in dealing with racism, white supremacy. And he specifically, victim, said that on the weekend program. These people, this is maximum racist aggression, but they know that. This is a victim who has been completely eradicated with regards to their ability to think accurately about racism, white supremacy, and we are going to further victimize him. You can just go back and listen to the archives when he was a visit on the program, and you can go back and listen to the archives from the White Privilege Conference, because that is one of that I would put this book on par with the White Privilege Conference. Both of those were loathsome, nauseating, revolting experiences for Gus T Renegade. Reading this book and being at the White Privilege Conference for a week. I mean, you talk about ridiculousness of the high. And I can't, with the White Privilege Conference, I said, you can even hear, I told Dr. Moore a year before I went to that conference that this is foolishness. Anything where white people are jumping up and down and clapping and celebrating, this is great, we're working against the racism, you already know this is malarkey. White people are not White people are not going to celebrate the end of racism, which is what they had on video. I got to the conference, and it was worse than what I thought it was going to be. Tapello?
Hey, have you ever thought about going back there, man? They're having it every year, right?
Yeah, it was in Seattle.
Hello?
It was in Seattle.
In Seattle? It was in Seattle?
I think last year, the 2013.
Well, it moves around.
It moves around. It's not in the same city every year.
I thought it was going to be in one. I thought it was in one spot all the time. But
no,
it was in Seattle.
It was in Seattle last year. It was in Wisconsin the year that I went. I think it was in New Mexico more recent. I don't know the one for this year they already had.
So you never thought about going back and questioning some of these people again on the radio and.
It would be tough. I mean, if I went back, it would be like war mode. Like I was trying to be nice, like at the first part of it last time, and I just couldn't do it. If I went back this time, like it would be, I am going to get kicked out of this conference, or I'm going to be totally disruptive every day, all day long, as much as possible while I'm here. And it's even worse because now he just did an interview. He was on PRX, and he did an hour interview. And you can get it. The first 60 seconds, you can see what happens when a non-white person is subjected to maximum racist aggression. They asked him about the conference, and the first thing out of his mouth was, we don't just focus on racism. We deal with classism and ableism and heteronormativity and gender disparity. We don't just deal with racism. We deal with all issues of injustice. So I don't want people to think that all we talk about is racism, because that's not true.
This is Winona LaDuke, and you're listening to Abatuse. All right, this is Winona LaDuke. Today I am wandering around. I think I'm down in Wisconsin here, and I run into this guy, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., who is in diversity education, research, and consulting. Aneen, hello.
Hi, how you doing? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. First time I run into this guy, he's working on this white privilege conference. Is that what that conference is called you got?
Yes. I'm the founder and program director of the White Privilege Conference, which is going into its 14th year, and it'll be held in Seattle, Washington next year.
And that's like in April or something?
Yeah, it'll be April 10th through the 13th. And the key thing with White Privilege Conference is we try to cover privilege comprehensively, not just skin-based privilege, but gender, language, religion, education, economics. So it's a conference really designed to cover how everybody has privilege, and we're all impacted by it in very different ways.
The name of the conference is controversial, but the founder says the information is necessary for everyone. In just a few days, Kansas City will play host to the White Privilege Conference. And as 41 Action News reporter Lisa Benson shows us, it often draws protests.
The White Privilege Conference starts on Thursday here at the downtown Marriott. This is the 18th year for the annual event, and today I talked to the founder, who said it's not what you think.
It's not just white privilege at the White Privilege Conference that we're looking at. We're looking at all forms of privilege. Our philosophy is everybody's got privilege. It just manifests itself in very different ways.
Eddie Moore Jr. is the founder of the White Privilege Conference.
Privilege means you have it and someone else doesn't have it, and the way you have it wasn't necessarily to your doing. We also look at ability, religion, language, culture, really exploring the issue of privilege comprehensively.
The four-day event is designed to empower and equip attendees to work for equity and justice. Moore understands that the name of the conference is unsettling for some, contention that's evident on the organization's Facebook page.
This is not about making white people be bad people or saying they're bad people. This is about a structural design that those of us living today had nothing to do with this design, but we're often dealing with its consequences, its impact, its effects.
They asked him about the conference, and the first thing out of his mouth was, we don't just focus on racism. We deal with classism and ableism and heteronormativity and gender disparity. We don't just deal with racism. We deal with all issues of injustice. So I don't want people to think that all we talk about is racism, because that's not true. And I said that right there further lets you know how silly and inaccurate this entire conference, and it's 85% white people. I saw that. She wrote that in the book. That further lets me know that you have this high number of white people coming. It's about 1,500 people, and it's mostly white people coming to spend in the neighborhood of $1,000 to hang out and go to these workshops and do all this other stuff. I mean, it is just mass nonsense. Nothing about it is serious. Nothing about it gives you a presentation that racism is war, terrorism against non-white people. It does not give you that. And you can just stop. The founder is a black male married to a white woman. That tells you everything you need to know about this conference. You don't even need to get to the details of what's going on there. And tricked into thinking even individuals like you who say that they are not racist and that they are against racism. They
Hey, I'm not
hang on. I'm not finished.
Hold on, you just put words in my mouth.
Hang on.
I'm not racist. I'm a white supremacist.
Hang on. Let me finish my commentary, because I didn't call you a racist. So let me finish my commentary.
I call myself a racist.
Cool in the gang. Fine. I will say your publicist said when I spoke with her, she said Debby Irving is not a racist. That's exactly what she said prior to starting.
Well,
so,
I'll have to straighten her out.
That's what happens as a white person. So what would be incorrect about that?
But she is not a racist I'll tell you that.
I did not call her a racist. And if that's her view, that's fine. She can state that. But I don't understand what would be a problem about why she would feel vilified or feel that there's something incorrect about that if she, in her book, says that.
But I think she might have felt like she was going to be totally attacked.
We're on the phone. we're on the phone. The most I could do is give my opinion based on what I read. You got me her book, which I appreciate. I read cover to cover and made notes. All she could do is say, well, I don't agree. We've had a lot of the people that she references in her book: Tim Wise, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., Jane Elliot, Thomas Shapiro. They've been on our program. I've been to the White Privilege Conference. So all she could say was, okay, I don't respect your opinion, or I don't agree, and that's fine. We don't name. I didn't even name call her in the description. If she read it correctly, I did not call her a racist. I didn't say that she was a racist.
Well, I just read it very quickly. So let me see if I can get in touch with her, and as long as you'll be fair and justice,
we
I think we'll be good.
We are professional. We are all about having vigorous conversation. And she in her book says that white people should be willing to be uncomfortable, should be willing to take feedback from black people, from non-white people. I'm a black person, so I have my perspective on racism. If she doesn't agree, that's fine, and we will be more than happy to hear any commentary she has. I will even give her uninterrupted time to offer whatever feedback she has about the description. If she feels it's inaccurate, if I wrote something that's not true, I will give her uninterrupted time to respond to that and any other comments I have about her book.
Okay, I'm seeing from my email right now that she says you haven't called yet. So
I've called twice. I've called her twice, and I've left a message as well. Before I called you, I called her 2 times. I called her at about 4. Well, I guess for her time, I called her at about 7:58, 7:59, and then I called her again. I left a voice message that first time, and then I called her again at about 8:05, and that's when I called you, and I didn't hear from her.
It was scheduled for 8.
I'm sorry?
Oh, okay. Forgive me. Right now, I'm not in front of my computer. It was scheduled for 8 or 8. I thought it was 8:30.
It was 8 p.m. That's what I have my email up right now. That's what I wrote in the email was 8 p.m. She, with the understanding that it's 8:30.
No, that must have been my mistake. Why don't you try her again right now?
Okay. If I don't hear from her, I'll give you a ring back.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Ms. Colley.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right there, but that is the person, her secretary or publicist or whomever, who set up the program. When she did not answer my calls initially before I hit the record button when I was speaking with her, she said that she read the description and she thought she was going to be attacked and she didn't want to go on. She's afraid of coming to speak to you all. And that was why I read the description at the beginning of the program to find out what did I say that's inaccurate. And that's even worse now because she admitted to being a racist. I didn't even call her a racist in the description. I said suspected race soldier. If you're an admitted racist, then it should be, hey, man, you need to edit that. I'm an admitted racist white supremacist. You can take the suspect out of there. Not, oh, man, I can't believe he said that. Oh, my gosh, I'm going to be attacked and vilified. That right there, in my view, speaks a lot to her purpose. I'm supposed to come and be a cool white person, and we're going to kick it and laugh and joke, and you're going to have lots of good things to say about me as a dumb white person and how stupid and duped I was. Not, oh, man, I'm a racist. What? Wait a minute. I've been to the White Privilege Conference. Dr. Eddie Moore is my man. Wait a minute. That is her purpose and why she goes and hangs out. That's why she enjoys hanging out with black people, because they don't think of her as a racist. They think of her as a cool, stupid white woman.
I've had more than a few people of color say to me, Debbie, you're wasting your time. White people know exactly how the system works. They deny it because it works for them. I know those people exist. I'll push them over there because I also meet white people every day who are more like me. Good intentions, bad information. Fortunately, not all people of color have given up on white people. This is my colleague, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. And in many ways, his childhood was a mirror image of mine because he grew up in one of those red-lined neighborhoods where he was exposed to negative stereotypes about white people. He got out of that neighborhood, he got to college, where for the first time in his life he met real, live white people and learned that, yeah, there are some hateful white people. And yet there are a lot that just lack education. So Dr. Moore has dedicated his life to educating white people. Among all he's done, one of them is to create the White Privilege Conference, now in its 17th year.